Hello, and welcome to another episode of My Pocket Psych, the podcast all about the psychology of the workplace. I'm Dr. Richard McKinnon. I'm a chartered psychologist and coach, and this is another episode in our Thriving at Work series, which focuses on how we can be our best selves at work. A real focus on our well-being at work, which hopefully spills over into our well-being outside of work. And you can find out all about that at a page on the website, worklifepsych.com/thriving at work. Now, for the first time in a while today, I'm rejoined by a friend of the podcast, Ross McIntosh. Ross, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks, Richard. It's delightful to be reunited with you.
Thank you. It's good to see you again. Are you thriving at work today?
Do you know what? I am.
By the sounds of it, you are.
I feel like I've got a bit of a pep in my step.
That's good to hear. You are being fueled by Spanish sunlight, though, which does help quite a bit, doesn't it?
It does support the pep in my step, yeah.
So today, our listeners may remember Ross, will remember Ross from our series all about psychological flexibility. So there are so many different ways that we can work on and boost our well-being. And we're exploring all these different ways across this series. But one of the great evidence-based ways that we can do this is by using these skills that increase our psychological flexibility. So today what we want to do is look at well-being through the lens of the skills that contribute to our psychological flexibility and just explain how they contribute. Because I know for my own part, when I was learning about ACT and psychological flexibility, it's not that it is a panacea, but there are some contexts in which you might say to yourself, I understand that, but what's it doing? How does it help? Why would I benefit from that? So we want to bring that to life today. But before we do, a little bit of news. So on October 24th here in London, I'm going to be running a workshop with other friend of the podcast, Dr. Rachel Skews, all about how to be more evidence-based when it comes to well-being in the workplace. I think that's another theme in this Thriving at Work initiative, helping organizational decision makers make better decisions about what they're doing to improve well-being at work. And in this half-day workshop, we'll be explaining what it means to be evidence-based, how you can build this into your decision-making and avoid some really common pitfalls when it comes to putting together well-being initiatives. I'll put a link to the event in the show notes. It's going to be in central London. We're actually having it at the British Psychological Society offices, really well served by public transport, really easy to get to. And the coffee's really good. And there will be some coffee on arrival. Secondly, and this is a really big piece of news for me, but it's something I committed to everyone quite some time ago. I've launched an open access training course. In other words, anyone who hears my words right now can sign up to complete this course. You don't have to come to me via an organization or be working in one of my clients. You could just sign up. And it is all about today's topic. How can you use psychological flexibility to improve your well-being? I'm going to put a link to the course details so you can find out everything about it on one page, including where you can sign up. But I would really encourage you, if it sounds interesting on the back of today's episode, get in touch with your questions. If there's anything you're wondering about it, just drop us a note, podcast@worklifepsych.com. And you've got time because it's a blended learning course, which commences with some self-directed e-learning to get everyone onto the same page, cover the core concept, get you reflecting about your why for the course, and get you reflecting about your own well-being and the kind of changes you want to make. And then we will together, that's you, me, and Ross here, will come together for a series of 3 interactive online workshops to bring it to life, practice the skills, answer all of your questions, and so on. And that doesn't start till the end of November. So you've got plenty of time to sign up, do that pre-reading, that reflection, and then join us. So there'll be a link to the course description in the show notes. And then the rest of this episode, hopefully that will bring that to life for you and you'll be intrigued and motivated to sign up for the course. Ross, what do you think about joining me for this course?
I'm super excited, Richard. I see it as the next stage in the evolution of our partnership working together.
Mhm.
And do you know what, folks? Spoiler. Am I allowed to do a spoiler? I've seen the
Spoil.
material. I've seen the material, and it's great. It's great. It's going to
Oh.
be really useful. It's accessible. It's useful, and it's really practical. So it's not
Mhm.
just theory. It's something that you'll really take away, and you can start making those adjustments in your own life. So come join us. And if there are any obstacles in your mind, come and tell us about them.
Because that's what we're talking about today. A lot of this stuff that prevents us from doing well-being, supporting activities, well, we get slowed down or prevented from doing them by the stuff our mind gives us. But before we get into the detail of that, let's start with one of the essentials. What do we mean by well-being? I'm really aware it's important to be specific and operationally specific. In other words, in this context, what do we mean by it? Now, in one of our subsequent episodes in this series, I'm going to be going into much more detail on the topic of why it's important for organizations to be specific about what they mean by well-being. There's lots of good reasons for that. And it supports the evidence-based approach, but it also helps members of the community in the organization understand, well, what is it you're trying to do here? And what is it you want me to do? And what do you think is going to happen when we do this thing? I use a very simple model of well-being. First of all, reminding people that our well-being isn't simply just the absence of illness or
Mhm.
injury. It moves in a positive direction as well. And it's really useful to examine our experience of well-being as a human from a few different complementary and mutually supporting perspectives. In other words, we have physical well-being. And are we able to do the things we want to do with our body? Are we maintaining it? Does it enable us to live the kind of life that we want to? We have psychological well-being, which is all about everything from our moods through on a continuum to say the kind of mental health conditions that can make life difficult, make it more challenging, and everything in between to do with what's between our ears. And then we've got one that's maybe less spoken about generally, but we have discussed it quite a bit on this podcast, which is our social well-being, our connection with others, our relationships, our staving off of disconnection and loneliness.
Mm.
And of course, these are related, right? It's very hard to, be psychologically well if you are socially disconnected. It's very hard to be psychologically well if you are physically disadvantaged. If there's something that you've acquired or something that has happened over a period of time when you're not yourself. And we all know what it's like when you pick up a cold, you pick up the flu. Life's tougher.
Mm.
Navigating the workplace is tougher. But rather than thinking of well-being as a score or a grade, it's much more dynamic. It's much more changing. And it's a little bit more complex than it's okay, it's not okay. Does that make sense so far, Ross? And have you got anything to throw into the mix?
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree that we can take quite a limited view of well-being. And I love the way you've divided it into physical, psychological, and social. There's three essential pillars of our well-being. And often we can neglect one or two of those and just focus perhaps on the physical or the psychological. And it takes a blend of
Mhm.
all three to really deliver that change. And it ain't always easy.
But at the same time, what we know is that it doesn't take upheaval or massive change to make a positive contribution to our well-being. And it's useful to think of these as being pillars because without one or two of them, they're not very useful. And if
Mm.
we only focus on our physical well-being, then we're missing a big part of the puzzle. And like I say, these things are mutually supporting, and there are other perspectives. This is not the only way to look at it. I hear people discussing and writing a lot more about financial well-being,
Mm.
and our well-being in our environment, the environment, nature, and our connection with that. So there are different perspectives on it. I like to keep it nice and simple because there are things that we can do for ourselves in each of these three. And some of the simplest things we can collectively call self-care. And I'll put a link to a blog post I wrote about self-care. It's the first in a series as part of this Thriving at Work campaign, just illustrating that it is really simple. And yet at the same time, we often neglect self-care because of I'm busy, that doesn't make any difference or whatever it is that we're doing. So if you bring it back to basics, that we ourselves can make a positive contribution to our well-being in some very, very simple ways.
Mm. And you're absolutely right. It does slip down our to-do lists, our own self-care, and we can maybe think it's self-indulgent. But we are here
Mm.
to tell you that you're worth it, and the benefits to be had by those small adjustments can be quite significant.
So what we're going to do for the remainder of our discussion is look at these three pillars and explain how the different processes or skills within the psychological flexibility model could contribute, could
Mm.
make a difference, could make it easier to do the thing. And not in order of importance, but we're going to start with physical well-being. Because when people think about making changes to their well-being, that's often where they go first. So let's talk about that. The example I want to use is a very accessible one. It's my example too, but it's, wanting to go for a walk every lunchtime. You've read the science, you've been convinced it's something you think that's possible. Yeah, I could do that. That would be good for my physical well-being if I went for a brisk 30-minute walk every day at lunchtime. Now, what I get between you and actually doing that, I mean, for me today, I just had to look out the window here and it was raining, it was gray, it was very windy. It was the last thing I wanted to do. But because of how I've interpreted this for myself, and particularly the values piece, I went and did it anyway because what's the worst that can happen? And it was no, going for a walk is not how can I make this more comfortable, but actually how is it a manifestation of the things I want to do for myself? How is this an example of values in action? And that's, I think, a good example of how when we're really clear on our values, we're able to then use them in very practical ways. Instead of, it's raining, I won't do the thing that I know is good for me. It's raining, but actually what's really important to me is to do this thing that I know is good for me. Of course, I could have bought into all the thoughts, all the emotions that come with imagining the discomfort and buying into the avoidance of the discomfort, the physical discomfort,
Mm.
being outside. And we were talking before I pressed record, coming from Dublin, you think I'd be used to a bit of wind and rain, but I know, and in my 48th year, I still want to avoid it. And actually being able to use the skills of diffusion and just seeing those thoughts as thoughts and not helpful thoughts at that. Almost a voice that was trying to talk me out of doing something I know is good for me. And then accepting the fact that, yep, then put your coat on, put your cap on, and get out there
Mm.
because there's a bigger picture. If I keep avoiding rain, well, I'm not going to leave the house for the next 6 months. We're, it's the 1st of October as we record. So avoidance is not going to be my friend here. And so leaning into having a flexible self-concept allowed me to tap into, well, I'm someone who goes for a walk. It was almost at that identity level. And it would be weird to me to not do it because I'm someone who does this. So it boils down to that choice that we've explored before. I can either avoid getting wet, avoid the discomfort of going outside, or I can make a towards move in the direction of all of the things that I know are helpful about this really simple activity. In a nutshell, that's what we're talking about here, bringing these things to life when it comes to a well-being promoting activity, something as simple as going for a walk. Ross, what do you think of that?
I love it. I love the way you've broken it down for us. And I think it can apply to any physical activity, whether
Absolutely.
it's a program of light stretching, whether you do yoga or Pilates, whether you're doing couch to 5K, whether you're going to the gym, playing tennis, playing football. I think it can really help you just work out what's going on either starting an exercise plan or maintaining it when it doesn't happen one day,
Mm.
realizing that you can reconnect. And for me, it's cycling. I love going out on my bike. It's something that gives me great joy, that connection with nature, and takes a bit of courage for me to do it. I don't feel I'm a natural cyclist, but it does bring me joy.
Mm.
And the things that get in the way are my thoughts like, oh, I'm not a cyclist. Imagine the gangly, awkward boy with big hair who was always last to be picked in PE. That's me. And that really established a sense of I'm not a sports person.
Mm.
But actually, when I'm out on my bike, I feel the freest I ever feel. And it's so important to me. But that stuff that gets in the way can be quite compelling. Like, oh, maybe I'll give myself the day off today and I'll start tomorrow. Looks like there's a cloud. There's one cloud in the sky. And I really cannot use that excuse because, folks, today it's 26 degrees. The temperature plummeted last night to 17 degrees.
The
And
hell of it. Oh,
you can't imagine how I suffer. And I'm going to go out for a bike ride a bit later once the sun goes down a little bit and it's early evening. It's a lovely time to go. But it's just for me helping me think about why that's important to me, what I get from it, and noticing those thoughts that come up and noticing when they are really hijacking my behavior and when it will be useful to kind of just choose to go and do it anyway. So that's how I
absolutely.
relate to it. And then if I have a day where I don't go, being kind to myself and saying, right, what can give you the extra pep to have a crack at it tomorrow?
That's really important, isn't it? Because we're talking about flexibility. We're not talking about more rules that you can break or ways that you can, I don't know, let yourself down and be guilty. We're
Mm,
talking about things you want to do. And that, that's a key point about values. Values are what you want to do, not how you want to feel. So if I wanted to feel comfortable and relaxed, well, I'd be on the sofa in the corner of my office with my feet up. But actually, what I wanted was to do the value of looking after this physical shell I inhabit. And one simple way to do that is to go for a walk. And there aren't even rules about how far. There's no rules about the route to take. The principle is get out and don't come back till you feel you've had a good walk, whatever that is. But those voices, those thoughts, they're very sticky, they're very compelling. And if I think about all of the clients I've had over the years who want to make change to their physical well-being routines, that little stuff, it's the grit in the engine that prevents them. They buy into a thought about exercise, about their routine, or I'm too busy to pause now. What would happen if I wasn't at my desk? The
mm,
world would end. They're just thoughts. And an observation is that stuff, if you can cultivate the skills to deal with that stuff, it frees up a lot of our capacity to then go and do the thing we really want to do.
mm. And I love that thing about no set rules because sometimes I think I'm going to go out and going to do 25K. And then I sort of get up and I think, well, why don't I just start out and see how far I get? And it's okay if
Yeah.
some days I maybe just do 5. That's okay because I know I'll make that up on other days.
Absolutely. So we want to remember the flexible parts
Mm,
of this. And maybe you're listening to this now and you are a high performing athletic person, you know, and you can still identify with, yeah, there's some days that I want to do that thing, but we could
mm,
do something else instead. If I don't want to go for a big long walk around the park, I'll just make sure that it's time to go and check the post 4 floors down in this building. Leave my office, go downstairs to the post room, walk back up. I've done something that taps into that principle. So, yeah, this is another point. It's what we want to do, not based on the comparisons we're holding with other people. When we think about other aspects that aren't really as focused on, I'm thinking about organizational well-being initiatives that really emphasize things like step challenges or um, meditation sessions, and actually some of the stuff that really could be taken care of before that, the real essentials of our well-being at work aren't really addressed. And so I want to turn to some of that, to psychological well-being, what we can do for ourselves, even if the organization we work in does not support that, or even if we're working in an environment where the organization is contributing to a lot of that. The example I wanted to look at was a very common one in coaching, which is how do I deal more effectively with my worries and my doubts? How do I reduce the amount of rumination that I'm doing? Because that would really help me with other aspects of my life. That would free me up to do more of what really matters to me. So again, we've got our principles here. This is skill diffusion, cognitive diffusion to enable me to cultivate a different relationship with these thoughts and see them in a different light. But maybe in order to develop that skill and practice it, I also need clarity on my why. Why would I want to do this? Because even though it's counterintuitive, I'm really good at rumination. Why wouldn't I just keep going with that? A change is difficult. So I need a why for that. And we can tap into being clear in our values. I think that's why I want to make this change. And it's often something I've observed, and you've probably seen the same. Someone isn't happy about an aspect of themselves, but it's also so familiar to them and they're so practiced at it that changing it is as difficult as, even more difficult than staying the way they are. I think rumination is a good example of that because it serves a purpose, doesn't it? It alerts us to things and we can feel like we're paying attention when all we're doing is wrestling with thoughts that are popping up about things that might never happen. And while we're
Mm.
doing that, we can accept the fact that we can't control this stuff. And we're just trying to view it in a different way. And while we act in a different way, that can be uncomfortable. And we can accept that because it's in the service of doing something else and bringing this to life. Even though it's not easy, we know why we want to do it. And so we practice the skills and move away from unhelpful self-evaluations about ourselves. We could apply this to so many of the things that we want to change that will contribute to our psychological well-being. I picked this one because it's a really common one, probably second only to I want to feel more confident in coaching sessions. What do you think, Ross? How does that one sit with you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it makes me think of the research that's been done in this area. And I partner with a fellow called Paul Flaxman at City University of London, and he's a recognized global researcher in using the skills from psychological flexibility in the workplace. And I'm the sort of practitioner arm of that relationship. And some of the research we've done indicates that 40%, between 40 and 50% of people in the workplace are experiencing borderline clinical levels of psychological distress at any one time. Between 40 and 50%. Crikey.
Yeah.
And that usually takes the form, or typically takes the form of stress, anxiety, depression. And what we know is that training interventions that seek to cultivate psychological flexibility from the research at City University, it brings everyone down below that threshold, say over 3 sessions. So we've got a real strong evidence base to be going from here in offering you this course.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
for me, the way I think about my psychological well-being, I've been a freelancer now for 10 years. And I took the leap from a very secure and long career in the civil service. And I love the freelance life. It's tremendous. And it has its challenges. And maybe just honing in on one of those challenges for any freelancers out there well, it can apply to people in the workplace too, is saying no.
Yes.
Sometimes I don't think what I want my work to be about. What are my personal values in relation to my work? Sometimes I just have this attitude of, oh, I'm so grateful you've offered me this project. I'm going to say yes. And it's not really aligned to my values. But I find it very difficult to say no because my mind is hijacked by unhelpful thoughts like, McIntosh, if you say no to this proposal or this project, then the whole world is going to come crashing down around your ears and all your work will dry up. You can see, folks, if you're not familiar already, I have quite a catastrophic mind. And I do, like Richard was saying, I do tend to overthink. So for me, there's a bit of there's a value of courage in that as well, to realize, well, actually, this project sounds okay, and it's not aligned with what's important to me in my freelance work. So I'm going to say thank you and no this time. But please do think of me in the future, rather than that knee-jerk thing of, got to say yes to everything. Because then I end up being overworked, stressed, and get to sometimes feel a bit resentful about those projects I've said yes to when it should have actually been a no.
That's a great example. When I was preparing for this conversation, I had to shortlist mine. I mean, so many examples of this. Well, one occurs to me is what we can do to deal with something that's causing us psychological challenges, someone else's behavior, and having a conversation about it, or our workload, and using these skills to talk to our manager about how we can make some changes there, or dealing with a source of anxiety and stress like procrastination, and using these skills to minimize that. For my own part, I think my psychological well-being has been improved by using these skills in one specific context, and that's where my suggestions or my proposals aren't accepted because someone says, could you do A? And I said, this is how I would do it. And they say, we're going with this guy instead. Now, sometimes that's like, okay, you win some, you lose some, but sometimes that is catastrophic. Oh, that's it. That's the end of my career. Oh, I'm not going to get any more work. Not only have they turned me down, they're going to tell everyone else they've turned me down. And that's how it's all going to dry up. And so for me, it's about spotting those thoughts as they come screaming towards me to say, not today. I've got stuff to do. And I have no time to sit here feeling sorry for myself and ruminating over this. In fact, what I could be doing is learning why it was that they didn't say yes, so I can better understand it and maybe take some learning from that, or simply move on to the next thing. But what doesn't help me, and I know this and through years of experience, is to sit with it, drag myself through it over and over mentally, and apply some label to myself that it is in no way representative of what actually happened. So that's the example of many that I wanted to bring when it comes to psychological well-being, because that phrase implies clinical psychological conditions. But actually, no, it's everything to do with the well-being between our ears and how we deal with day-to-day challenges, setbacks, annoyances, life's hassles. And these skills are great for that. Let's turn then to our topic that, as I said, maybe isn't looked at in such great detail in well-being in the workplace. And we might not think of it top of our list either when we think of our own well-being, and that's social well-being. The example I wanted to use is one that's actually come up in training courses I've been running. And it's about reaching out to cultivate a relationship with a brand new colleague. And this is an example where psychological flexibility can be a real asset. And in fact, this was an example I used in the document I shared. I think it was last year. You can find it online at worklifepsych.com/connect and thrive, which is all about how we can battle loneliness at work. But it's one of those day-to-day challenges. Oh, there's a new face. What should I do? Now, we might think to ourselves, I'll go and introduce myself. Maybe I'll ask them if they want to have a coffee. I could show them around, but then all the thoughts pop in. What if they say no? What if they're not a nice person? What if I experience rejection? Then there's the play it safe. Well, if I don't approach them, no chance of rejection. So I'm avoiding, avoiding, avoiding. So if we reach into our psychological flexibility toolkit, we can tap into our values, one of which might be about connection with other people. It might be something like compassion. And you might think, well, that person's new. It would be compassionate to introduce myself. You can think about not tomorrow, not next week, but really connect with the present moment to say, this is a good time to do it. And this is the only time I can take action is the present moment.
Mm.
And we can use our diffusion and our acceptance, both seeing unhelpful thoughts for what they are, but also accept the risk of rejection. Yeah, they might say, no, I don't have a coffee with you. But if they're a typical human, there is probably something like, I don't have time now, but maybe later or tomorrow.
Mm.
But if we don't try, we'll never know. And we get into that avoidant strategy again and again. So using those twin tools and then really focusing on putting that value into action, emphasizing the towards move is walking over and introducing myself. The easy away moves are all of the other things. Keep my head down, focus on my email, ignore the risk of rejection, and also miss out on the opportunity of connection.
Good Lord, Richard, that feels so familiar.
And
And I feel like I've been in that situation hundreds of times. And sometimes I've been led by my fears. Just something that pops up for me as an example, a recent example from me. I was invited to go to a networking event in Seville for Spanish psychologists. And many of them have a sort of interest in our field, psychological flexibility, sometimes more broader, but many of them have an interest in that. And I was invited to actually speak as well. So I said yes. You may be surprised to hear, folks. I've been learning more to say yes, and then the worry comes later. But going into the city on the bus that morning, I was kind of thinking, God, it would be great if the bus broke down. And I couldn't make it there. Arrived at the venue, saw the chap I knew who would be interviewing me, and felt frozen. My primary urge was to run. As I looked around that venue, I felt very alone and lonely and disconnected. And I kind of anticipated this might arise. So I'd actually done a little bit of thinking before I went. And I thought, who do I want to be? I want to be friendly. I want to be warm. I want to be courageous. I want to be curious about other people and be connected. So I just tried to breathe a little bit because I noticed I'd kind of stopped. And noticed as I looked around that everyone was just looking at their phones. Everyone was looking slightly awkward. These highly skilled people, everyone around the room was just looking at their phones. So I thought, I'll say hello to the person next to me. And it did. And it worked out all right. I could make myself understood. Still had my little section to come up, but it was all okay. And I think, look at the risks there. The risks of me praying the bus would break down. The risks of me seriously thinking, do you think if I went now, anyone would notice? Just wanted to run back down those stairs because it was on a beautiful terrace in the open air in Seville overlooking the Giralda. And I just wanted to leg it because I felt so uncomfortable. I stayed. My ambition was to make contact with at least 3 people and come away with 3 contact details. And I did. So I wasn't looking to meet everyone in the venue, everyone at the event. So I just took that random kind of approach. I gave my little talk with my notes. I think my hand was shaking slightly. And it was important to me to have a go and do that and to, be more vulnerable than I felt in a long, long time. But then after the talk, more people came to speak to me because they were interested in what I was doing. So it's not always it's not always as terrifying as our minds make out it will be.
No, rarely. But that's not
Exactly.
the same as discomfort, which is real. Don't like this. It's not sparking joy. But most things we do don't spark
Mm.
joy. But we pay attention to the certain kinds of discomfort, rejection, boredom, being wrong in front of other people. These are just some of the examples, none of which are catastrophic, but we'd rather not experience them. And all of this, especially the social, but the connection, there's a big theme of anticipated rejection or anticipated making a mistake or being embarrassed. The big themes there. So there's a lot to avoid. But at the same time, there's a lot to be gained by connecting with others.
Mm.
So much to be gained and so much to be avoided in a positive sense, like disconnection and loneliness, which are truly bad for us. And even though it's a difficult topic, it's worth remembering that ongoing loneliness puts a dent in our physical health. It damages our immune system. So it's really important that we get sufficient, whatever it is that we need as an individual, sufficient connection with others. And I think that's why I really want to make this link between what we can do using this psychological flexibility framework and the result it can have. And just that one connection with a colleague if you're feeling lonely, or speaking to that new neighbor, or going to that event. So I'll be banging the drum for this social well-being bit because it is so easy to go in the opposite direction. And as you've said, find comfort in our devices, find comfort at home and not leave home, find comfort in avoiding imagined interpersonal challenges rather than values aligned connection with other humans. It's so important. So what we've done, hopefully it was clear, but let me recap. What we've done is looked at 3 pillars of well-being and explained, made some links using examples about how these skills of psychological flexibility can make a real difference. And we could do this for days, couldn't we? With all of the challenges in life, we could, do that mapping. But I just wanted to open the door to it a little bit and give people an insight into what these skills are and how you could bring them to bear on virtually any aspect of well-being. And while we're on the topic, I'll plug it again. The blog series that I'm writing about self-care is a really good example of that, because things that we might label self-care, they're not very good for us. They could be avoidance. It could be procrastination. It could be using food to deal with our emotions and not doing something that's much more worthwhile and necessary for us. And at the same time, some really small things that we do can have a big impact on our well-being. We could say, yeah, that is good for me. And it's not about doing new things. As we've discussed before, sometimes self-care is saying no. Sometimes self-care is doing less or avoiding an opportunity because, oh no, my dance card is full and it would not be good for me to do this. So I'd encourage everyone to have a look at that series as well, because it's another one of those phrases that's taken on a life of its own, self-care, and it's a little bit misused. So what we're really talking about is anything you do intentionally to absolutely boost your well-being, not the avoidance, not the substances, not the cake, or as I always say, the image of someone sliding into a bubble bath with a big glass of wine. Yeah, that could be on a given day self-care. But if you're doing that instead of something much more important, then that's not self-care. That's avoidance. So, Ross, any final words to throw into the mix before we wrap up for today?
I don't think so, Richard. I love that you brought a touch of Bridgerton to it by saying your dance card was full. So I appreciate that. And I hope folks can join us on the course. We'd love to see you there.
I promise no more references to Bridgerton.
Oh,
That was not
I'm
intentional
not
at
coming
all.
then.
Please check out the link in the show notes taking you to Thriving with Psychological Flexibility. And if you've got any questions about it at all, anything, just drop us an email, podcast@worklifepsych.com. No previous knowledge or skill is required. We're starting with the basics. And at the end of the course, you'll know how to cultivate new habits, put them into practice, understand why you're doing what you're doing, and deal much more effectively with the stuff your mind gives you about why you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. And then step into that space of thriving rather than just surviving. Thanks for joining us today. As Ross said, I hope to see you on the course. If not, it's fine. We'll see you in the next episode. But for now, thanks for listening.
Bye, folks.